It's time now this week for our monthly legislative update, this time with Representative Dave Maturen, who's in the studio with us this morning. Good morning, Dave.
Morning to you.
Thanks for being here today. You can join us if you like. 441-9595 is the number if you have a question for Representative Maturen today, and that's right through till the end of the half hour. One of the things that's getting a fair amount of press is the president's budget and some of the things therein. And one of the concerns you have as it relates to that is funding for Great Lakes initiatives, which appear to be on the chopping block.
Well, yes. In fact, the entirety of the whole federal match money from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is being proposed to be eliminated by the Trump administration. I represent the state of Michigan on the executive committee of the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus, 8 states and 2 Canadian provinces that all touch the Great Lakes, and we have a great deal of concern about the funding levels. There's still lots of work to do with cleaning up our industrial heritage pollution in the Great Lakes, and we want to keep that going. And it's not a freebie as such. There's still match money that needs to be added into by states and localities when they want the cleanup to occur. But we think it's pretty short-sighted to think that the Great Lakes are not a national treasure, just a little Midwest treasure.
Yeah, good point. You know, if we zoom out and just talk about this whole approach for a second, do you get the sense that the Trump administration is serious about cuts like this, or they want to make cuts knowing they'll have to make compromises? So let's just start out with a big slasher and see where we end up.
That's kind of the art of the deal. You start off with perhaps an outrageous demand and then, meet somewhere in the middle. I'm hoping that, I'd like to have the entire thing restored because Congress last year authorized a 5-year, $300 million payment. That's what Congress did, for 5 years. And all of a sudden we kind of the first year into this thing and all of a sudden the whole thing's chopped off. But we have a conference today with the folks on the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus, and we have a resolution coming out as much as resolutions can do, just to express our concern for what will happen. But could just be the art of the deal. Not sure. Yeah.
Well, a resolution, as you say, doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot other than sending a message, I suppose.
Well, it sends a message, and there's also in 2012 there was a compact between the United States and Canada dealing with the same issue, and so we'd like to honor that international compact too if we could.
So what does the Restoration Initiative really seek to do?
Well, it deals with cleaning up a lot of again legacy pollution issues that have occurred over the past decades. We've kind of treated our waterways as a convenient out of sight, out of mind dumping ground, and so there's lots of work to do yet. In the Great Lakes, you got a major pollution issue in Lake Erie with algae blooms, stuff that endangers people's drinking water, a whole host of issues, and just want to keep that on track and see what we can do. There's not been any alternative that's been mentioned to cutting this. No, not at all. No, it's just I think it's an attempt to get at the EPA with some of its rules and regulations, but this is different from rules and regulations. This is actual funding that goes to help restore our Great Lakes.
Representative Dave Maturen's with us this half hour on 95.3 WBCK. Short break, and we'll come back. You can join us if you like, 441-9595 if you have a question on that or other issues this half hour for Dave Maturen. 95.3 WBCK. We're here with Representative Dave Maturen this half hour. You can join if you like, 441-9595 if you have a question about maybe the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative or other subjects. We hear the United Way folks mention this a fair amount, and I was out and about on Friday and heard folks talking about this as it relates to early childhood education. Reading, you're about to go reading soon.
Yes, shortly after I leave here, I'm going to go over to Waddles Elementary and read to those kids, and I've got another couple schools to go to in Calhoun County in my district. It's always fun to read to the kids. I think they get a big kick out of having somebody different kind of come in and read to them, and hopefully I've got a book that they haven't read yet, or if it is, it's one of their favorites. So lots of enthusiasm. So.
And it's reading month, so that's
it is reading month. That's right.
Appropriate. So the income tax discussion in the state of Michigan flared a little bit a while back, and it's been interesting to kind of sort of hear the fallout from that, or at least some of the ripple effects of that discussion. It didn't go anywhere, but the notion that maybe we could get rid of the income tax in Michigan. You voted against that. Some didn't, obviously, but you did, and it was a comfort level thing.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm used to looking at not only budgets for my own little business, but also budgets for units of government that I've been involved with, especially Kalamazoo County.
Mm-hmm.
We had a 5-year budget then. We'd take a look at every possible scenario we could look at and see what impact it had down the line. I took a look at the income tax reduction. And it started off as a complete reduction. Then it got morphed into another. Then it got morphed into another scenario. By the time you get about 2 o'clock in the morning, you're really not quite sure what's going on. All the numbers thrown at you. But nonetheless, if you take a look a few years out, it would have a major impact on the general fund. And the general fund has been the same, roughly $10 billion in 2001 as it was in 2017, with a $1.2 billion hit on the general fund, and the fact that we've got $600 million coming from the general fund for roads that we've never had statutorily before, and $200 million in homestead property tax relief to get that deal done. Mm-hmm. We're looking at about $2 billion that's going to hit a $10 billion general fund a couple of years down the road. And we asked where the cut's going to come from, and there was silence. So I think it was, let's take credit for the tax cut and let somebody else worry about the cuts later on. And I couldn't in good conscience do that. People want to show me where they're going to cut and show me the plan starting right now, strategic budgetary cuts, so everything is cool when we get there. I think it's fine. But the numbers just weren't in there for me. And it's interesting that I got a nice thank you note from Gary Wolfram. He's an economics professor at Hillsdale College. Mm-hmm. It's not a liberal institution, I can tell you that, or it could be classical liberal, but let's put it this way, it's a very conservative college.
Yeah.
And he's got a nice white paper on what happens when you hit these budget cuts. And basically, one of the first things that cut is statutory revenue sharing. And they're short about $3.5 billion over the last decade. There's a statute that requires a certain percentage, 16% of the first 4% of the income tax, the sales tax, to go to statutory revenue sharing, mm-hmm. but it has to be appropriated. And so, unlike constitutional revenue sharing, that gets paid, has to, by the Constitution. Somehow, the statutory stuff just never makes it to be fully appropriated. So that's the first thing you cut. That's the first thing local governments rely on for police, fire, you name it.
Well, and we just spent 4 months, once a month, talking with various folks close to budgets at various levels. And certainly when we talked with the city of Battle Creek about that, that's the one thing they want to talk to folks like you about bolstering, not cutting.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, again, the provisions there, it just politically never gets appropriated. When the state of Michigan starts to have fiscal problems, they kind of draw on the wagons, and local units of government are the first folks to feel the pain. So.
We're here with Representative Dave Maturen. You can join if you like, 441-9595. If you have a question about that or budgets or other things, come back in just a moment. A few more minutes with Representative Dave Maturen. You illustrate a really great point here that, everybody would like to pay less in taxes probably, but the notion is if you don't know how you're going to do it, then it really is sort of disingenuous because it sounds good, but later on it's a problem.
Well, somebody else down the line has to make the hard decisions. What are we going to cut out of the general fund? And that funds all the state departments. $2 billion in correction. We're going to close prisons. We're going to cut state police schools. So what are we going to do? And it's one thing to know what those are and then make an informed decision and look at the pros and cons and say, okay, this is the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But when you don't know that going in, again, you get all the credit for the tax cut. People love you, and 2 or 3 legislatures down the road, they're the ones that have to clean up the mess. It's kind of like pawning off all of the unfunded liabilities on our kids. We can have a great time today, spend it all, and don't worry about who pays for it. So I think it's unconscionable to pass something on to future generations, future legislatures, that they have to deal with, and it was of no making of their own.
Is there some sort of structural change that we could make, do you think, that would help lawmakers see this differently?
I don't know. Anything that's statutory can be changed by the next legislature. I mean, last term we said we're going to spend $600 million on roads in 2020, 2021, and if the legislators in power at that point in time, won't be me, decide that they don't want to do that, then it falls apart. Just like, again, statutory revenue sharing that never gets appropriated. So it's the only thing you can do is put things in the Constitution, and sometimes that's good, and then sometimes you're putting something into law that really is very difficult to change. And how do you foresee the future to see if that's the appropriate thing to do? Maybe trust people? I'm not sure.
Wow. Might be a big leap. I don't know. Yeah, and you made an interesting point that the general fund balance hasn't changed much. This is 2017. 2001 is the year you referenced. And anybody who buys anything regularly knows the price of things goes up. So somehow we're managing to balance this.
Well, we are, but we've made substantial cuts in the number of employees in the state of Michigan the last decade. I mean, I don't have the exact number with me, but over 10,000 employees. So I think they really are trying to do the right thing. Inflation adjusted, that budget's about $6.5 billion if you look at inflation over the past decade or so.
Right.
So we're trying to do more with less, like a lot of other folks, folks in the private sector and homeowners too.
Mm-hmm. So. Before we go, let's talk a little bit about this Freedom of Information Act expansion package. It might have surprised folks to learn that the Freedom of Information Act did not extend to the executive branch. This was one of the things that came out of the Flint water situation. I think it got some light shown on it because of that. This could change.
Well, it could. It passed the House. I think it's one of the first things that's a package of about 10 bills that passed unanimously in the House. Didn't have one person opposing it, I don't think. It certainly FOIA doesn't apply to the executive branch. It doesn't apply to the legislative branch. It certainly applies to all the departments. But it's an attempt to, I think, add some transparency. FOIA for the executive branch, and then what's called LORA, Legislative Open Records Act, for the legislature. So it's not a complete FOIA type of an aspect for the legislature. It's a start. It has opens up more transparency than we currently have. It may go nowhere in the Senate. We've seen that before. So if the Senate Majority Leader and the Senate's not interested, it was a great job by the House, and that's as far as it goes. So we'll see what happens when the Senate, if and when they pick it up, and what they want to do with it.
And this is the way progress works. It might sometimes it's a little progress, sometimes it's a lot.
It's a three-legged stool, and there's two more legs to that stool. Yeah. So.
Quickly here before you go, the dark store legislation that we talked about many times last session that you've sponsored, it may get reintroduced here.
I hope to do that tomorrow.
Okay.
And essentially it passed the House 97-11 last year. Very controversial, and it's very unusual to have something pass 90% in the House. I went to the Senate, and it went nowhere. So we're hoping to find a different result this time, but you've got to introduce something before you can start to watch it wind its way down the pathway. So looking hopefully to have some more professional aspects of valuation applied by the Michigan Tax Tribunal when they make some extremely important decisions.
And this is, I guess, an example of what we were talking about with the FOIA thing. Sometimes things move, sometimes they don't.
Passed the House and sat there and didn't go anywhere for 6 months, and then the session ended and has to be reintroduced all over again.
It's considered done at that point. All right. Well, we'll see how that goes, and we always appreciate the updates you give us, so we'll talk again in April.
My pleasure.
Representative Dave Maturen on 95.3 WBCK.